First off, first person I'm introducing, he is a co-founder, and CEO of Trumpet. His name is Robbie Vitrano.
On its best days, advertising communications basically takes a good idea, takes a thought or an inspiration, and it focuses it in a way that people can understand and that can be effectively deployed. So again, if you think about that, that gives you an opportunity to think about what you do, not just to sell a product or create consumption or demand for it, but it also allows you to think about how you can organize complex issues and focus them in a way that can make a difference. So when we came back, and like everyone else, we were the first agency to open back in the city. We were back up in September. And the sense of commitment on our part was that, we're supposedly a creative company. We're people that are charged with coming up with ideas and applying them. And how can we use that skill set, that capability, in a way that's going to have an impact on the community?
My name's Ted Featherstone. I'm the Real Estate Development and Urban Planning Coordinator for the Downtown Development District. The Downtown Development District is a public development authority for downtown New Orleans. So we don't handle the French Quarter per se, although we partner with the French Quarter on a lot of other items. So if you're on this tour expecting to see the French Quarter, see jazz and gumbo and swamp tour, this is really not that kind of a tour. This is more of a tour of the pressing issues and developments going on in downtown New Orleans. I'll give you a little background on downtown New Orleans to start. Historically, the French Quarter was obviously the French and the Spanish downtown. That was the original downtown of the city. Once the Americans took over in 1803 after the Louisiana Purchase, downtown where we're standing now was the American city. And Canal was the dividing line between the two. And there actually were two different municipalities for a while. There was actually three, but the American city was separate from the French and Spanish city over in the French Quarter. So the two of them had very different development. As you can see, a lot of the business grew up in downtown, and there's a lot of old office buildings in this area. But one thing I'm going to be discussing as we're on this tour is how New Orleans' economy has evolved over time and how that's really reflected in New Orleans now and how some of the changes in the buildings and the developments reflects that.
Next up, we have Mai T. She's the community organizer for the Mary Queen of Vietnam Church out in New Orleans.
So after the storm, it's actually a part of the city that is often forgotten. It was one of the areas that was designated as a green space, meaning that after the storm, that they didn't want people to come back and for it to basically return to wetlands and green space. The community in November of 2005, so a couple months after the storm, actually mobilized community members to go to this meeting that was put on by the mayor to be like, we have a couple hundred people who are already back to the city. So you can't you can't tell us not to return because we're already back. So that kind of is an example of some of what the community has had to go through since the storm, and it's been kind of a constant fight. We had a landfill that was placed less than 1 mile from our community, and right now we were able to shut it down, but currently the debris is still there, and it's actually not even following EPA standards. Like, there isn't even proper lineage for this landfill. The permitting was done during emergency powers when the mayor, had the executive ability to just, bypass any community process and just say that a landfill can be placed here. So right now we're actually in legal court cases about it and trying to make sure that it doesn't affect the long-term sustainability of the community now. And a lot of people always ask, how was the community able to return so quickly after the storm? And I always like to tell the history of the community in the sense that the community came here in the early 70s. Basically, the mass migration was after the fall of Saigon in 1975. But before that, there's a long history. This community basically lived in 3 villages in northern Vietnam pre-1954 when the Geneva Accords were signed. They were Catholic villages in northern Vietnam. After 1954, due to religious persecution, they all migrated from northern Vietnam to southern Vietnam. So that was just the first time that they were displaced. And then in 1975, after the fall of Saigon, again due to religious persecution, they had to come to the U.S. It wasn't out of choice. It was just because they just couldn't live the lifestyle that they wanted to live in Vietnam anymore. So that's a second phase of displacement again. And then at that point, they were resettled in refugee resettlement camps in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. And from there, the Archbishop Catholic Charities came and offered them a place to live in New Orleans due to the huge shrimping industry, and a lot of the community were actually shrimpers in southern Vietnam. And then at the same time, there was housing, and the weather's really similar, and a place for the community to stay together.
There's kind of two different skyscraper cores in New Orleans. There's what we're close to right now, and then there's up close to the Superdome, which is at the far end of Poydras, close to the interstate. Now, up by the Superdome, those were mostly built during the big oil and gas boom that New Orleans had in the 70s and early 80s. Now, when OPEC started in the 80s and they put the artificial price controls on oil, just like in Houston, New Orleans went gangbusters. All of a sudden, there was money flowing in the city that really never existed before.
Next up, we have the Associate Director of Common Good and the newly elected President of the Young Leadership Council, Nolan Marshall III. President-elect.
Don't give me that responsibility. And when I started that Court Watch program, I would tell people we have a 10% conviction rate in the city for violent crimes. It was in the Times magazine article that came out, I think maybe a few months before Katrina, talking about our crime problem. And now, I guess, a year and a half into this program, the violent offenders unit in the DA's office has a 95% conviction rate. And being able to look back, it's small steps, it's small things, it's people coming together to be able to address in a diverse way the problems that are facing the issue, that are facing the city, that's going to allow us to move forward as a city. The other things that we've worked on are ethics reform. Common Good was one of the main organizations responsible for pushing the city towards creating an ethics board, an independent inspector general, and an independent monitor. And in the fall, that's something that the citizens will be able to vote on, so that it's a statutory in the charter office that will have in the city that will address the other big problem of perception that New Orleans has, and that's about corruption.
Something they've been working on over the past year and a half or so is a river redevelopment plan for the entire riverfront, about a 6-mile stretch. Historically, that area was always dominated by the port. The port controlled almost all the riverfront assets in New Orleans because that was the primary industry. As the port has shrunk and consolidated, especially upriver, we now have a lot of old, decaying wharves down here that are just begging for redevelopment. And so the New Orleans Building Corp in partnership with the port have come out with a whole riverfront redevelopment strategy that stretches, like I said, for 6 miles. And most of it is public greenway, just what you'd want out of your river. A lot of cities have actually taken the same steps. What can we do with these old, decaying areas?
Our next panelist is the Chief Operating Officer for the Capital One UNO Charter Network of Schools. This is also with the College of Education. You're also the Chief Operating Officer of the College of Education and Human Development.
Well, I'll explain.
All right. Dr. Vera Triplett.
I have very different ideas about what a quality education is and what a quality day should look like for a child. I think that all schools should be good schools, and I think that people should be making choices about where their children go based on they offer such and such program and my kid's interested in this, or this school is logistically more convenient for me. I don't think people should have to choose to go to the school where their kid is less likely to get shot, or where the teacher is less likely to curse them out, or where they're more likely to get hot lunch. I don't think that those should even be the things that people should worry about. I think that there are certain things that should be given when a kid walks into a building.